The infrastructure bill allocated $22 billion to Amtrak for some much overdue repairs. I sat down with Stephen Gardner, Amtrak's CEO, before Amtrak began canceling trains ahead of a possible rail strike.
Stephen Gardner, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be with you, Bob.
Let me ask you the obvious question. What was the pandemic like for Amtrak and for you personally? You know, I talked to a fair amount of members of Congress in the spring of 2020 who were getting briefings, and they thought, well, it would maybe last a few weeks or a couple of months, and we're still in it. How has that affected Amtrak?
Well, Bob, it was an incredible disruption to our business, as it was to everyone. And at Amtrak, we saw essentially 100,000 riders a day sort of disappear over the course of a month. We went from about 100,000 down to about 3,000 daily riders. So it was really an unparalleled impact to our business. And of course, it made sense at the time. We were in lockdown, everyone rightfully very concerned. But it was a huge change at the company and required us to radically downsize our operation, develop new procedures as we all tried to understand the safe way to navigate this pandemic and ensure both our employees and customers were safe, those who had to travel. So it was a huge disruption. I'm really glad to say that through that, we did do, I think, a good job at maintaining that safety and building confidence for riders so that now ridership is really coming back. We see strong demand again. We had a lot of new people come and try Amtrak and rail for the first time, maybe because they were not interested in flying or looking for a new travel option. And we hope to keep those passengers and build back to the levels we were before the pandemic and beyond.
Congress did come together. Bipartisanship is rare nowadays, but they did come together to pass the infrastructure bill. I believe that has $22 billion for Amtrak. How are you going to spend that money and over what timeline?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. We see just strong bipartisan support everywhere across America for passenger rail investment. And that really, I think, was in clear effect here with the administration and Congress's work with the bipartisan infrastructure law. That bill does provide $22 billion directly to Amtrak over the next 5 years. And that funding is really for us to bring our system today and all of the assets and technology and infrastructure into the 21st century. Amtrak inherited a collection of rolling stock. Those are passenger cars, locomotives, and infrastructure, bridges and tunnels, many built in the 1900s, early 1900s, some in the 1800s. And we've been working hard to bring those into modern standards. But this is the funding we need to take those old assets and have a whole new fleet of equipment and upgraded infrastructure to support our network and grow ridership.
As far as the process of how Amtrak decides where to spend that money, upgrading, obviously, along the Northeast corridor, there are some repairs that are needed, or will it be, across the country? And how do those decisions get made?
Yeah, great question. There's really 4 big areas of investment, and those are occurring nationwide. Our big infrastructure needs, those are our bridges, tunnels, tracks. Those are primarily in the Northeast corridor. That's where Amtrak owns the railroad. Most of our trains operate over the freight railroad network where we're a tenant. But in the Northeast, we own the big portion of the Northeast corridor. So we've got a lot of infrastructure responsibilities there. Then we have this fleet that I mentioned, our passenger cars and locomotives. We've already started the process of upgrading that fleet, but this new money provides us the ability to complete that process in total. And that's going to be for our entire nationwide fleet. So the trains that we use for those long distance routes connecting the regions, for our state supported or corridor services going from city to city. So over the course of this next decade, we will place the orders and start receiving new equipment for the entire network. So everyone across the nation will see the benefit of that investment. And then we have our stations, many of which are not either in a state of good repair up to modern standards, and many of which are not yet accessible to all passengers. So we will be making big investments there to bring those stations up to standard. And finally, we've got a lot of core technology needs. Again, as the digital technology revolution makes everything more accessible and brings new capabilities and innovation and efficiency, we're going to upgrade our systems so we can provide better service to people all over America.
You're a former Capitol Hill staffer. You've been at Amtrak a long time, been in this field a long time. Big picture, if you look at other countries, including China, who are ahead of us, what is the future of rail? Where do we need to go? I would imagine that you're very thankful for this investment, but you're going to need more investment down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an incredible investment. It's more money, or sort of roughly equivalent to all of the federal investment in Amtrak over 50 years, is now being provided to the company and to the Department of Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, who's a fantastic leader on rail issues. They've got a big portion of funding to help support improvement and expansion of the network as well. So combined, that's about the same amount that Amtrak has received over 50 years. So it's a huge change, and it really does enable us to start to fulfill what we think is our core mission, which is to provide valuable options to American travelers, a sustainable path of mobility that has a lower greenhouse gas emissions profile, and really provides economic opportunity for communities around the nation. We are going to need more resources than this. This is a great down payment that gets us started, primarily first in replacing all those old assets, but then through the money that's available through the Secretary and the Department of Transportation's leadership, starting to put more trains in more communities where today Amtrak may serve once a day or maybe not serve at all. We think passenger rail has a big role to play. If we're going to address climate change, we've got to have more sustainable means of transportation. And the big difference between Asia and Europe and America is the investment. That past 20 years, Europe has invested about $1 trillion in their passenger rail system. We're here really excited about this investment of about $60 billion between Amtrak and the Department of Transportation, but it's really just the beginning. And we see so much more opportunity for passenger rail. We have the largest rail network in the world of any nation, something that we often don't talk about much here. What we need to do is use more of it for moving passengers as well as freight. We need to see both parts of this industry grow, and we're confident that can happen.
How confident are you that outside of the so-called Acela corridor, that putting more trains and this type of transportation in other parts of the country can be profitable?
Well, I think that the key sort of point here is, where can passenger rail create value? And I think there are places all over the United States where that's true. We measure our value by not only the kind of bottom line of revenue and expense, but also the value we bring to communities in terms of mobility and job creation and opportunities. And where we've seen places all over the United States that have not had lots of rail service in the past, and we've introduced new service, we see strong demand where we can have a reliable, frequent, and trip time competitive with driving service. People choose to take the train. And I think part of that is because it's just so much more productive than driving. Today, everybody's on their phones. They want to be doing work and experiencing digital technology all the time. It's difficult to do that in your car. On the train, you've got that capability. And we see really strong preference, particularly amongst the younger generations, for rail travel. So what we've got to do is put trains in the right spots where the markets, I think, support them. But there are lots of places. Think about in Texas or Atlanta or places in the Mountain West, like the Front Range, Tucson to Phoenix. These are corridors which we have either no or very little service today, but have huge population and a lot of demand, we think, for service like this. Where we've done it in the Midwest and the Northeast and the California and Pacific Northwest, people have responded. We think that's going to be true in these other corridors as well.
Stephen, in many industries, including in journalism, there's a labor shortage here. How have you dealt with that, and going forward with all this expansion and spending money? How are you going to handle also an aging population, more people retiring? How will you deal with that and acquiring talent?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's on the minds of, I think, every organization right now. We have a really robust hiring plan. We've already hired over 2,000 folks this fiscal year alone. We've got 50 hiring events scheduled for next year. We've got about 4,000 vacancies we're trying to fill. And that's in part to bring back the service levels we had before the pandemic, and then to create that capacity we need to do a lot more building and new service. I will say we're getting a lot of great excitement from folks. I think people are excited about the possibility of rail and Amtrak, and that's good. But it takes a long time to train and qualify the employees we need, because this is specialized technical work. So that's really our big challenge: is we've got to get folks through the training process. But we're building a whole new capability. For a long time, Amtrak was replacing employees as they retired, but wasn't really in a growth mode. And now we are in that mode, and it takes a different mindset. I will say there is excitement across the country in having an opportunity to be part of this passenger rail revolution. So we're taking advantage of that and looking for employees everywhere we can.
Last question. With all this money coming into Amtrak and being used for new initiatives, but also repairing issues along the Acela corridor, I think everyone wants to know. I want to know. I'm from New York. I take Amtrak all the time. Will this affect, repairing? Will this affect current trains now? Because I'm sure some people are thinking, oh, there's going to be delays because they got to fix X, Y, and Z, and you do have to fix a fair amount of things. How will you deal with that?
Well, it's a good question, and it is going to be a challenge. We've got to repair and rebuild assets up and down the Northeast corridor that are, in some cases, something like our Baltimore Potomac Tunnel is from 1860s. So we will be working hard to both achieve that work and provide great levels of service at good reliability. And the benefits of these projects as they come online, they will be reducing some trip time in cases, will certainly be increasing reliability. So there will be benefits, but just like you see in the highways and the airports, when you're under construction, it does cause some disruption, but we're going to be working with all of our partners to try and maintain the service levels we can and create a lot of new tools for our passengers so they can understand exactly what our service is, how our trains are performing in terms of on-time performance, and put more control in their hands about adjustments for schedule. But we're going to be working hard. Our goal is to both rebuild the railway for the future and also grow service. You'll see that with our new Acela trains as they come online, and then the new regional fleet that comes mid-decade that we've already placed the order for. These are going to be a big upgrade in terms of performance and give us more capacity to serve more folks. So maybe we'll have bigger trains, can carry more people, and that will help us while we also have to do some of this big repair work on our tracks.
On the Acela timeline, as far as those new trains, when any idea of when that they'll come
next
online?
Year? Yep, 2023. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, Stephen Gardner, heading Amtrak at a pivotal time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bob.